Welcome to episode 22 of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's podcast is entitled A Perfect Storm. Originally it was planned as Listen Deeply, but I think you'll see why the rearview mirror title is better. This week is part live recording. It is inspired by this month's Soul Matters theme, Living Love Through the Practice of Deep Listening. I hope you enjoy. Good morning. I'm Eric Hepburn. I'm your pulpiteer. I'm honored to serve as such. I'm glad to be here with you this morning in this weird, perfect storm of a morning. Why is it a weird, perfect storm? Well, it's Pet Blessing. And I wasn't with you on the first Sunday of the month, so it's also the day when we're covering our Chalice Circle topic, which is deep listening. And it's Pride. It's Pride Sunday at Georgetown Pride, so we'd love to see you out there. But I'll get to all that perfect storm nonsense in a little bit. Please join me in reciting the words to light our chalice. We light this flame to remind us love is the center. As we grow and connect, mature and deepen, love remains the center. When the light of truth burns all else away, love remains.
I invite you to a place of deeper stillness and reflection with the reading from Dr. Maya Angelou. Now, if you listen closely, I'll tell you what I know. Storm clouds are gathering. The wind is going to blow. The human race is suffering, and I can hear the moan, 'cause nobody, but nobody, can make it out alone.
'Cause nobody, but nobody, can make it out of here alone. The words of Dr. Maya Angelou. I promised you a little bit more about this perfect storm. Now, perfect storms, not unlike the hurricanes we've seen down south over the last few weeks, they are incidents, but they're incidents that can't happen without bigger shifts in the overall containing environment, right? They are resonating with larger changes that are happening. So they are discrete instances, but they are not by, of, and for themselves. They are deeply interconnected, right? Which is why we're not just talking about hurricane relief. We're asking questions about how much climate change is or isn't implicated in each event. We're asking questions about how much changes in our own behavior might or might not begin to tip the scales. So we've got that happening in our atmosphere. There's another thing happening in our atmosphere. I think you all can feel it. The anxiety level keeps ratcheting up week after week, and you know it ain't gonna get better for a month. And at the end of that month, it might not get better. I had an interesting insight moment when I was away from y'all for 2 weeks, and I was up in Chicago at seminary, meeting with some other students in the Doctor of Ministry program. The healthiest churches talk about what's going on. For real. In the world, in your lives, in politics, even when that's uncomfortable. And I realized in that moment that I have been at least a little bit guilty of giving into my own predilections of abstract philosophizing, which I do love, but I have graduate school for that now, so I might be able to let y'all off the hook on that one. or at least take it down a couple notches. We'll see how that goes. One of the other things that happened was that I realized that one of the most important and central lessons that I have had the grace to learn and that I want to share with you all is the ability to slow down, the ability to create some space and spaciousness in your lives, in our collective life. Like I suspect many of you, I developed at a very early age a pattern that I like to call in the rear view hypervigilance. There are other names for it. Some of those names sound like anxiety disorder. But it is a belief that happens for a lot of children in our culture who believe that the only way to stay safe is to run their brain at 110% pretty much every waking hour. Wait, what's going on with those people over there? Do I have to, can I intervene? Can I keep myself safe? Can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? This may or may not resonate with some of you. But I'm suspecting, given that it is a cultural proclivity toward anxiety that we live in, that it's not a stranger to any of you being in that state. Nor maybe a surprise that some of us live in that state or have lived in that state for long stretches of time. Me for about the first 46 years of my life. Starting at about 3. I can remember the day it started. So, not 46, 43 years. I'll pretend I can do math. So, if I'm going to do that with y'all, I can't get up here and model brain on at 110% every Sunday and then ask you to slow down. That would be unkind, ungenerous, unwise, and ineffective. So, I'm going to try to slow down while I'm up here as a way of inviting you to slow down and settle more deeply into some of the hard truths that we still need to wrestle with. We're just not going to try and do it all at once. So, we're talking about this air of anxiety that's out there in the world. We know where it's coming from. We know what's going on. We don't have to rehash all of that here. We know that part of it is about white Christian nationalism. It's a book I just finished reading on. There's a post on Facebook about it with a reference to a book called American Idolatry. It's a book that just came out last year. If you identify as a Christian, you'll enjoy this book a lot. If you don't identify as a Christian, you might have to do quite a bit of translating while reading the book. But it's a really solidly researched and executed book. And I'm asking you to join me in promoting this book to the people in your life who identify as Christian. Or maybe you have friends who have family who identify as deeply Christian. I'm really strongly recommending this book. Now, it's written from a deeply Christian perspective that I no longer personally share. And it's calling people into the teachings of Jesus and away from the idea that, let me just make it simple. There's one version of this where God is on America's side. God is on America's side. So whatever America does, it has to have been blessed because God's on our side. But you see that that's an escape hatch from doing the work. The work is not to claim God's on your side. The work is to try and figure out how to get what you do to be on God's side, if we want to use that language. Or if we'd like to use some more you-friendly language, on the side of life, on the side of Gaia, on the side of healing, in line with cosmological, universal, grand unified theory, if you prefer to think of it in very intellectualized terms. But the truth is, there are rules out there. We're learning them, and we're trying to figure out how to align what we do with those laws that we can't break and bend to create a flourishing environment for life. For our lives, as was made clear by our friends this morning, for the lives of our animal companions and our plant companions and the fungi that make the trees and the forests and the birds and the bees and the creepy crawlies. So I've been thinking a lot about the pet blessing. I've been thinking a lot about this Pride event that we're doing this afternoon. I've been thinking a lot about racism and white nationalism. And I've been trying to remember that today's sermon's supposed to be about listening. So, I think there is a center to that Venn diagram. Let me see if I can help us tease it out a little bit. It is interesting to me that in the history of chattel slavery, we did a lot of things. By we, I mean the white people of America did a lot of things, and of other countries, to the slaves that now in the rear view are really just in the realm of the unforgivable to nearly unforgivable, breaking up families, treating people like possessions, massive dehumanization, belief systems that had this idea that maybe white people had souls but black people didn't have souls. And we can look in the rearview now and be like, whoa, at least we're not there anymore, thank God. But we are not as clear of that as we think. And our we is not as wide as we'd like to think it is. And it's definitely not as wide as it needs to be for the healing that this planet needs and that we need. One of the ways that I know that is that we still think that other mammals don't have souls. We still treat them like objects that we own sometimes. We separate them from their families of birth without a second thought. Now, I'm not inviting you to feel guilt or shame over your relationship with your current pet companion. I'm inviting a reflection because I want to take what I know that you know is true, that there's a soul in there. They might not think like you, they might not talk like you, but you got to have a soul to have joy like that. Can I hear amen? You got to have a soul to cause the kinds of deep heartbreak that we have all experienced at that loss. Can I get an amen? So, why do we tell ourselves this strange little lie when we know it's not true? What are we trying to justify? I would argue that we're trying to justify a little bit of unfeeling callousness, a little bit more of that superiority thing that we've been struggling with. Questions more profound than answers. I'm not offering you answers today, but I think that this is a question on Animal Companion Day that's worth sitting with. The we keeps getting bigger if we let it. Let's tie in listening. How do we let it? How do we let our we get bigger? How do we let it get that big? What is prayer, after all. Prayer and meditation might just be a way of getting quiet enough to hear the voice of God, or the voice of Gaia, or the voice of nature. Maybe you think of it as the still small voice within. I'll let you in on my perspective on it. It's not the perspective, it's just mine. I've noticed a strange thing, especially in deep moments of like vision quest or on day 4 of a long fast, which is the voice of God arrives in me, but then I translate it into words. There's a moment where I can feel emotionally the impact of a received message, and then there's a pause, and then it comes out in my own voice, like in my own language. So what if we're receivers, right? So the still small voice within is true. It's our voice. We're translating the messages that we get from the whatever it is that's larger than us into words we can understand. And as we know, not all translators are equally good, right? So we have to do work in our lives, intellectually, emotionally, so that our translations get better and better. So there are some methods that we know of. Some of us are more or less diligent at their practice. But there are some methods where we can get quiet enough to hear those deep murmurings. But when I sit up here and tell you that the something larger needs you as desperately as you need it, I'm not speculating. I can say that faithfully because that's what I've been told. It comes through in every channel. If you're tuned into the science channel, you know that your travel and flight and consumption patterns are implicated in the global warming thing. So if you're tuned into the science channel, you are getting the same message that I get when I'm out on spiritual retreat, which is you are needed in this moment. Will you answer the call? The other message that is really resonating for me right now that I'm going to share with you as we wrap up, because I have to get out of here and get back to Pride and help kids make bracelets. It goes a little something like this. You've heard me say before that we can't just heal us just in this little room. It's not going to be enough. Everybody needs healing. Everybody is worthy of healing. I want you to notice that I didn't make a fact claim that everybody could be healed. I don't know. I don't know. I have met some people so deeply damaged by the trauma of their lives that I personally wonder, is there really a narrow path road back for them? And I don't have an answer to that. And from my experiences with Spirit, that's not the kind of question I can get an answer to. I could pray on that question until the cows come home, and I'm not going to find out anything new about it. Here's what faith tells me. If there is a chance for any of us, it is through our ability to expand our love and compassion. That is the guidance that keeps our feet on the narrow path as we do this work. And the bigger the we is, the more people we can put inside that circle of love and compassion, the more healing we are contributing to the process. It's just like deciding that, maybe I'm not going to fly halfway around the world for a weekend. Maybe that's not what the climate needs from me right now. Well, the climate probably also doesn't need you complaining about your uncle who you vehemently disagree with. If you've learned nothing else from you covenanting, learn this. Try not to talk about people, try to talk to them. This is the other moment where listening matters greatly. You see, because if you show up to your crazy uncle's doorstep thinking, okay, Eric said go talk to him, not about him, I'm going to do it. Now, uncle, let me just tell you why you're wrong. Anybody have any prognostications about how that's going to go? Now, I know that you've been through XYZ and you believe XPQ, but let me just explain what you're not thinking about. And you might be partly right. There might be a great deal of insight you have about your uncle's position. But the only way to offer healing to your uncle is for you to do your work first and figure out how to leave all your judgments in your car and walk up to that front porch with an open mind, an open heart, and curiosity and say, we both know we disagree, but I'm curious. I love you enough and I'm curious enough that if you're willing to make the time, I'd like to sit on this porch and hear your story. I'd like you to help me understand where you're coming from. That probably doesn't sound pleasant. You probably know that there's a tirade or two that's going to try and push every button you own headed your way. What if it's not about you? What if they've never, ever, ever been able to be in a room with someone who loved them enough and was willing to show up enough that they could push all the buttons and still be loved? What if that is the core of the fear that drives the anger and the hatred and the resentment and the more fear and the anger and the hatred and the resentment? That lingering belief that all of us suffer from, that we're just not enough. Because you can show up and help them heal that. And that might be a first step. May you find in your journeys this week questions more profound than answers, play more proficient than mastery, vulnerability more powerful than invincibility, supplication more productive than control, and a peace that passeth all understanding. Go in peace. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. The Pulpiteer podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn. Special credit this week goes out to our partners at Soul Matters Sharing Circle, making Unitarian Universalist worship and education materials for all ages. This week's reading was courtesy of Linda Mueller, and our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. See you next week.